Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a lovely evening last night. It is raining outside, but even better because we are inside and starting off our last day of Seoul Defense Dialogue 2023. So let us now begin bright and early with our third plenary session. Our third plenary session will be held under the theme of a new security environment, ways for regional and global cooperation. And to take us through, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the session, who will be Professor Emeritus Mr. Kim Woo-sang of Yonsei University. Without further ado, please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Woo-sang Kim, currently Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Yonsei University. Previously, I served as Korean ambassador to Australia and also the president of Korea Foundation. I'm very much honored to moderate this third plenary session of Seoul Defense Dialogue. Our main topic of the day is new security environment, ways for regional and global cooperation. And we have 6 distinguished panelists joining us for this plenary session. To my left, I'll briefly introduce them. To my left, Mr. Wilgen Schredel is Directorate General for Security and Defense Policy of German Federal Ministry of Defense. To his left, we have Mr. Scott Miller, Visiting Assistant Deputy Minister of Canadian Department of National Defense. And to his left, Her Excellency Anne Karin is a Norwegian ambassador to Australia. And to her left, Dr. Cha Do-yeon is a principal fellow of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. To his left, Dr. Alex Tan is a professor of political science and international relations at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. And to his left, Dr. Park Jae-jeok is a professor of Graduate School of International Studies and Underwood International College at Yonsei University. Yesterday, in the first plenary session, the North Korean nuclear threats and international community's responses to deal with North Korean nuclear threat was discussed. And in the second plenary session, these discussions were focused on the United States and China's hegemonic competition in Indo-Pacific region. So today, in this third plenary session, we are interested in identifying other challenges the global society is facing and finding out how to deal with those challenges through regional as well as global cooperation. Now we have about 85 to 90 minutes for the session. So in the first round of discussion, I would like to ask each of the panelists to make about 5 to 7 minutes presentation of your talking points that you have already prepared. So we'll start from Mr. Schredel.
Professor, thank you very much for setting up this meeting. And first of all, I would like to thank our Korean host for setting up the last day such an outstanding conference. As a participant from Europe, from a capital in Europe, I only can say it was worth every minute of my 18 hours plane ride coming over. So it was really a good conference so far. So maybe first of all, I would like to define a little bit our position of Germany, where we are standing. Germany is a country with a solid democracy, a robust economy, and meanwhile a well-financed armed forces. So we interact with friends, with partners and allies in the world who share our values and interests. And this is necessary today. Our security environment is going under a profound change, and we are living in a watershed area. Our chancellor called this Zeitenwende. Russia's war of aggression against the Ukraine brought war back to Europe. And the enormous terrorist attack of the Hamas at Israel challenged the security order we Europeans are all used to. In parallel, the global order is changing too. New centers of power are emerging. The consequence is obvious. The world in the 21st century is multipolar. And let me say this as a European country. The political and economic balance is increasingly shifting towards the Indo-Pacific area region. And how does Germany react? And what are our intentions? And I want to be very transparent to you. Concerning this, I want to offer some insights. First of all, we want to support peace and security in the rule-based order in the region and in the world. Therefore, we intend to conduct Indo-Pacific deployment, for example, with our Air Force and Navy next year. We plan to participate in the Pacific Security Maritime Exchange to prevent North Korea from evading UN sanctions, and additionally, bilateral and wherever possible, multilateral training and activities to conduct them. Secondly, we are looking for deepening our relations with partners and friends here in the region and overall. We want also diversifying our partnerships to avoid unilateral dependencies in the region and wherever in the world. Thirdly, and important for all of us, we want to support open shipping routes, open markets, free trade as a prerequisite for a peaceful interaction in the area. And therefore, we do not support neither a unipolar nor bipolar approach for the region, especially here in the Indo-Pacific area. And our last priority for us is the access to a free and fact-based information area, which is crucial for peace and security. We all need transparency to take the right decisions. And coming to my last point, how do we want to achieve this in a changing security environment? So one German approach is we as a European country support the European activities. Together we are stronger than any nation by itself. Secondly, we support multilateralism and with the aim to reduce unilateral dependency and the ability to act and support sovereignty. We support the rule-based order, including the human rights, because it's not the law of the strong that must prevail, it's the strength of the law which is decisive for us all. And last but not least, we want to support partnerships among equals. For this, we want to set up our cooperation on an equal footing and in the spirit of shared values. And to conclude my remarks, I want to outline that this year we celebrate the 140th anniversary of the Korean and German relations. Especially the current situation makes such a cooperation particularly valuable, and it shows that the security of Europe and the Indo-Pacific are indivisible, linked together. So thank you very much for this introduction.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Scott Miller, please.
Great. Thank you, Professor Kim. It's very exciting for me to be here speaking with you this morning, and very exciting to be doing it in Seoul. Canada has had a strong and enduring relationship with this dynamic and like-minded country. We bled with you during the Korean War. Since the armistice, we have been one of the original sending states that have maintained a consistent presence at UNC. Our Chief of Defense Staff for the Armed Forces was actually a Deputy Commander at the UNC, the first Canadian, and we have a second Deputy Commander from Canada that will be starting December, 3-star. we also have had, I'm looking at the Canadian ambassador, we've had 60 years of diplomatic ties. And I'd say, like, as a recent example of the warmth of the relationship is how much Canada appreciated that during our worst wildfire season on record, where our armed forces was deployed for 131 straight days to fight wildfires across Canada, that the Korean military sent your folks to help support us in that, and that means a lot to us. Canada will remain committed to peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula on the basis of that strong relationship. And 1 year into our Indo-Pacific strategy that we launched, we're leaning forward not only with Korea, but with other like-minded countries from the region. This has included military-to-military dialogues, as well as defense policy dialogues. We've had several naval deployments, building upon a long history of naval deployments in the region. In fact, actually, since in the last 8 years, we've visited 80 ports in 22 countries in the region. We're also looking to expand capacity building. And again, we've been doing this since the 60s. We have a military training cooperation program where we've been providing specialized training support to, I think, 11 countries that are actually represented here at this auspicious event. We've also been engaging in exercises regularly, such as the recent Sama-Sama exercise in the Philippines with many, again, partners from this room. And these kinds of commitments, commitments of partnership, dialogue, and enhanced security cooperation are the key to managing our security environment today more generally, and not just in the Indo-Pacific. I'm not going to go through that security environment. I think others have more eloquently done that over the last 24 hours. We've heard of the many existential threats that are facing all of us. And we've been talking about how can we face them and the importance of the rules-based order in that regard. In the world of innovation, very often you hear that sentiment that what got us here cannot get us there. But when it comes to rules-based order, I would say what got us here is what will get us there. And I think there's the conversations that can happen about is the rules-based order, it's under threat, is its demise imminent? And I think the fact that we've all been getting up here talking about the importance of partnerships, the importance of multilateral institutions, speaks to the fact that we care about the rules-based order and that, in fact, its demise is not imminent. We are working hard to preserve it. And so doubling down on partnerships and on our multilateral institutions is key. And, you know, as much as there's been relative stability thanks to that order, you know, we're not in a new world of the fact that we have existential threats now. They are deep, they are profound, they are advanced, there's no question about that. But they also existed over the last 30 years. We could sit through and go through a whole litany of conflagrations that have faced countries and multiple countries over the years. And that rules-based order helped us through that and was preserved, and in fact sometimes have strengthened that order by the fact that we had shared existential threats. I'd say the biggest lesson we learned from that time is that dependable partnerships are the bulwark to international stability. Now, I'm going to horrify my Canadian delegation counterparts where I'm actually going to work through a bit of an analogy just to kind of mix things up a little bit. It'll be a very Canadian analogy, but I'll have to start by giving a little bit of background. I come from the Pacific Northwest, and in Canada, that is British Columbia. And I'm very fortunate that I have access to a summer place that I go to every year. And it's off-grid. We are in a log home. We are 2 hours from any police, hospital, what have you, and off the electrical grid. And it is very much in what we call bear country and cougar country. And over my years of going up there, I have come into contact with grizzly bears on untold occasions and sometimes just a few feet away. I'll get to why I'm telling you this story in a minute. One of the most important thing is being safe. And some people, a bit of a joke that we have is the way to stay safe is to go hiking with slow friends. That's one option available to you. I'm not sure whether you're really a friend if you do that. Some might think carry a rifle. That's what I used to think when I went up there. And I will tell you that you being alone with a rifle, based on actual research of bear encounters over the years, is actually one of the least safe things that you can do. You alone, looking at a grizzly bear with a rifle, very often when you fire it, it will glance right off of its skull. You will not get the shot that you need. And greater than even chance that you will be hurt, and the fact that you actually fired a rifle, based on research, is it escalates the level of injury and attack than if you never fired the rifle at all. What is the safest thing that you can do? The safest thing is to be with a group of people. Be with a group of people. The bear sees you not as an individual, but as a group of individuals, but as greater as the sum of your parts. You become a large entity to it. It confuses it. It looks to back off. It's even better if some of you have whistles, or you have a dog with you, or you know you're trained and you understand that running away is a stupid thing to do because a bear can run faster going up a hill than a thoroughbred racehorse can flat on ground. And what's interesting is that that grouping doesn't have to be the situation where you all like each other or know each other very well. The most important element is you're seeing the existential threat in the same way and recognize that being together is a lot better than being alone. So the analogy is probably becoming pretty apparent here, that element of going things alone because you think you have a certain capability that will help you weather a storm won't get you there. You do need to be with other people. You do need to be with partners. You actually need to practice this as well. You need to train. You need to exercise as a group. You need to know that you be able to rely on one another, to know that you are dependable. And I'd say that that's the analogy I think of that we should all focus on, is that we have these existential threats. We are not children. You know, it can't be that, okay, country X has some views different than myself, so I can't really work with them. We're adults. You know, there are things that we are going to absolutely be partners on. There will be some things that actually will be competitive on, friendly competition, and there are some things that we won't be aligned on at all. But if we keep talking about those threats that actually threaten all of us, recognizing that no conflict is just local, in fact, it is global, that will get us to a good place. I'm almost done. I'm using up my full 7 minutes here, maybe a bit more. But I just want to say a little bit about the relationships themselves. So, okay, you have that group. How are we going to work together? How are we going to train together and the rest? I've worked in organizations before where they would count the strength of their relations with others by the number of MOUs that they had. Memorandum of understanding are great, but you know, like a marriage and a prenup, it doesn't guarantee romance in a relationship. That MOU that you have should be the basis of a lot of great work that you've done together. It's consecrating cooperation, dialogue, shared objectives that you've discussed about, and more importantly, it opens doors by delineating certain areas of activity where you can do more together than you have in the past. So I would say that the conversations that we continue to have about how we can work together, how we can exercise together, how we can train together, and really through that, not just the fact that we have an agreement, but we have a shared history together and of depending on one another, will really strengthen those partnerships and the rules-based order within which they operate. As a very last quick thing to close out on, just because, and to bookend a bit, you know, the shared objectives are important with a partner, and the objectives for Canada as it relates to the Indo-Pacific region is certainly one where international rules and norms prevail, and where we work together to preserve an Indo-Pacific that is free, open, and inclusive. So with the Indo-Pacific strategy that we announced, $500 million that we have put aside to deepen work that we've already done to date. So you will see us more in looking to engage with you to give us advice about how we can best spend those dollars, but certainly being involved, again, in dialogue, in exercises, in training, and doing new kinds of things where we're actually sending defense policy advisors to countries in the region to deepen cooperation. We believe in the importance of ASEAN centrality. We're excited to be considered a strategic partner. We're excited to be observer on 2 key working groups, and we've applied to extend that observership. And we're excited as well to continue to be part of Operation Neon, to preserve peace and stability in Korea, on the Korean Peninsula, by monitoring UNSC sanctions. I will end there in the interest of time. I am very eager to talk about the threat of Russia to the international order, as we've been asked to do, and I can do that during Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we invite Her Excellency, Ambassador Obin.
Good morning, everyone, and let me thank the organizers for inviting Norway to participate at this very prestigious dialogue arena. And thank you also for your kind introduction. With the conflict now unveiling both in Ukraine and in the Middle East, we are seeing a further deterioration of the international security landscape. And this demands, of course, changes. It demands changes in our own foreign and security policy, and it also demands the way and how we value partnership and alliances. So Russia's war in Ukraine has changed the security framework, of course, in Europe and globally, and of course to the Norwegian foreign policy. And being a neighbor to Russia, I thought it would be most valuable for me to focus on how that has changed the environments in Norway, and also bring that perspective to this conversation. So I will spend my allotted time to share some of our reflections on the situation, having that in mind. And also to be very clear from the point of departure, Norway condemned this war and holds Russia accountable. And it's also Russia's responsibility to bring the war to an end. And Norway stands firmly with Ukraine and support its right to self-defense and to protect its civilian population. And Norway support also Ukraine through civilian support, military support, and humanitarian support. And close to $8 billion over the next 5 years have been approved by the Norwegian Parliament. And I underscore 5 years because it says something about the perspectives here, and that we are ready to support in the years to come what it takes. So this is one point, but let me also underscore that increasing support to Ukraine means also that we are increasing support to developing countries affected by the war, and that is very important from our perspective. Geographically, Norway sits on top of Europe, and we share a border with Russia, 197-kilometer long land border, and on the other side of the border lies the Kola Peninsula, the main home to the Russian nuclear forces. So we, as Norwegians, know what it means to have a nuclear neighbor. For more than 25 years, this also meant that we worked together with Russian experts to clean up storage sites for spent nuclear fuel from submarine reactors and containers with solid radioactive waste. This is just one example of cooperative relationships that has come to a halt after the Russian war in Ukraine. But let me also mention that research cooperation has been suspended, and people-to-people projects and other cross-border contact and cooperation has been, of course, become very, very difficult, extremely difficult, and contacts remain really at a minimum. Because Russia is now an unpredictable and aggressive neighbor that ignores international law and uses military force to pursue its goals. As South Korea's President, Mr. Yoon, noted in New York at his speech, such behavior for a permanent member of the UNC Security Council is a paradox. So how do we respond to this situation? Let me highlight four points. We are strengthening our national defense and facilitate Allied presence and training in our northern regions. That is, the first point I would like to highlight. And let me also be clear that we do not see Russia as any immediate military threat. Recently, the Chief of Defense reported that the number of Russian soldiers along Norway's border is at 20 or only at 20% compared to the period before the war in Ukraine. But there is an intelligence threat, there is a hybrid threat that we follow and monitor very closely. Second, we have sanctions in place aligned with the European Union. And third, we have a stronger alliance. NATO has become stronger. There are more resources and military forces available in also our northern region, with Finland and also soon the new member, Sweden, to join. This is, of course, in Norway's interest. I think that the war in Ukraine has made the importance of the security guarantee of our allies in NATO more apparent. So my fourth point is that we have enhanced cooperation with partners, such as South Korea and other NATO partners in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in areas such as non-proliferation, cyber defense, and counter-terrorism, to mention a few dimensions that are important. And this is, of course, in our interest as developments and interconnections between the Indo-Pacific region also impact the security of the Euro-Atlantic region. And that collaboration and closer partnership are, of course, important to maintain and to take care of our interests. So these are the 4 points I wanted to make, but of course the overall point is what my colleagues already has mentioned, and that is the idea that borders can be changed by military might, that sovereign states should be refused the right to make its independent decisions. That is really the essence of Russia's war in Ukraine. And with Russia's war in Ukraine, Norway's Prime Minister has gone from talking about a world order under pressure to a world order under attack. And it is the values of democracy and of international law and the principles of sovereign and territorial integrity that is the essence of, this is the essence of the UN Charter, and that is now being challenged. And that is why we are standing up, and that is also why we need more international cooperation, not less. And I also think this is also why we need a dialogue arena like the Seoul Defense Dialogue. It is really something that we are all preoccupied with, and I also wanted to stress that point here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ovin. Next, Dr. Cha, please.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Yeah, first and foremost, I would like to say that it's my great honor and pleasure to discuss about these very important issues for global cooperation and peace with distinguished participants I respect. Although the official language in this dialogue is English, and I believe my English is not so poor, I will talk in Korea from now on for more accurate communication on these crucial issues. 크게 시간이 제한돼.
I do not have much time, so I'd like to point out 3 major issues facing the global community. First of all, as we know very well, our world is becoming more dangerous. In the 1990s, we already witnessed globalization and information technology. And at that time, we thought that the Cold War was finally over. But now the world is going through a new phase. Of course, there are many areas where countries cooperate. But in this process, we see that there's an increasing level of distrust and mistrust. As you can imagine, that sometimes you would have to live with someone else, but if you do not trust that person, then you will end up hating that person even more. And I believe that the world that we live in is very similar to what I just described. And the situation will become even more dangerous going forward because of the potential use of nuclear weapons. In the 20th century, we had the Cold War, and we were able to maintain a Cold War state because of, or thanks to, nuclear weapons. Because at that time, people knew that if a third world war occurs, then it would be definitely a nuclear war. And that was the deterrent for major powers to refrain from using any weapons of mass destruction. And at that time, there was an unwritten consensus that nuclear states would not threaten other non-nuclear states with their nuclear weapons. However, such a consensus was broken because now we have the Ukrainian war. In addition, we have many dangerous situations on the Korean Peninsula. This means that we now come to realize that nuclear weapons can be used in practice for certain situations. This means that we no longer have a binding force that was able to unite countries. In the past, countries were able to cooperate to face common threats, including pandemics and terrorism and climate change and piracy and environmental challenges. And for these challenges, countries were able to work together because these were common challenges that had to be overcome together at the global level. But this is no longer the case. In 2020 and 2021 and 2022, we realized that global health issues were not even able to unite the world. In the beginning phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, you can see what countries did to respond to that. They were not motivated to talk with each other and work with each other, but rather they were busy pointing fingers at one another, and they were busy talking about who to blame for the pandemic. This means that the so-called emerging security threats are no longer able to bind countries together around the world. That is why we are now seeing a higher level of distrust and hatred. Then how can we overcome the situation? As Mr. Miller mentioned, we can think about restoring multilateralism. But what I like to propose is that we have the international institutions and international organizations, and we need to restore the authority of these institutions, including the United Nations. We have the United Nations and international organizations and other mechanisms in place, but they have been losing their authority and power. And you can see that in the cases of North Korean nuclear development and other similar cases around the world. You may know that North Korean nuclear development was indeed a process or history of violating UN Security Council resolutions all these years. Since 2017, North Korea has been accelerating and advancing its nuclear capabilities, but the UN was not able to make any single decision that could dissuade North Korea because there are different opinions among the Security Council permanent members, and even some of these permanent members are siding with North Korea. Likewise, we are so used to nuclear threats. So we have become more used to the current situation. And that has led to the weakening of the NPT, a non-proliferation treaty regime. Therefore, we need to not only restore multilateralism, but also restore the authority of international organizations. And I like to approach this from two perspectives. In the 1960s, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. And at that time, Ambassador Stevenson, who was an ambassador to the UN, said that the UN is the court of world opinion. So this means that by using the UN, we can create an environment where such an actor can feel ashamed of of their action. Likewise, we need to restore the authority of the United Nations because it can serve as a benchmark or litmus paper to evaluate certain countries' actions. So in that sense, we need to discuss how we can restore the authority and influence of the United Nations. And we can use the UN mechanism to make sure that countries will not try to change the status quo with force. And we can also discuss how to minimize damage and casualties of civilians. So we need at least a minimum level of code of conduct in today's world. And this is one approach we can take to restore rules-based international order. When it comes to the details of how we can restore the authority of the UN, I don't have much time left, so I can cover that during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cha. Next is Dr. Ten from New Zealand.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for a wonderful dialogue, and I'm really very honored and happy to be part of this dialogue and give an opportunity for us provide some views from down underer as we're further down under from Australia. So our conference hosts have asked us to reflect on 4 important questions on the role of institutions and international security. Rather than tackle all 4 questions, I focus this first 5 minutes or 6 minutes of my address here on 2 questions, namely what impact can loosely formed or flexible security cooperation bodies have on the global security system at the regional or global levels, and how can the international security system prevent the divisions brought about by the competition and the intensification of the US-China strategic competition from leading to conflicts and confrontation. Allow me to take these 2 questions in reverse order and also permit to focus my opinion on a regional rather than a global level. In the Asia-Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific, we have a glaring lack of formalized security architecture, unlike NATO in Europe. It is not for lack of trying, as the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization was created in 1955, but only lasted until 1977. Yet, despite the absence of a formal security structure to, quote unquote, maintain the peace, Asia-Pacific seem to have been able to do so as well. So the question for me is why? Is it because of an invisible international security system that somehow manages to play its part and make conflict absent? Is it some magic of a system, unbeknownst to us in the region? I think the short answer to that for me is no. The coming together of several factors, in my view, may have worked in favor of the region. Namely, and let me list this, number 1, the hegemon's interest in the region. Number 2, the security partnerships and alliances that actually exist in the region, though not necessarily multilaterally. Number 3, the prevalence of developmental states in the region and their converging economic interests. And lastly, small and middle power agency in the region to navigate and manage complex power relations in the region. So speaking from a small state as New Zealand is, we've had to deal with many of these. All the above factors work on their own to contribute to some sort of peace and stability in the region, and yet they also work together. The hegemon's interest in the region played an important role historically. since the end of the Second World War, the United States as the hegemon has been very much involved in this region. As, quote unquote, the western flank of homeland defense, so to speak, the United States has deep national and strategic interests in this particular region. These interests are not only security, but complex and interdependent economic interests as well. While not resident on the Asia side of the Asia Pacific, the United States as the global hegemon is clearly an important big player. Unlike Europe, with at least some common historical heritage, Asia Pacific is much more complex, and should I say, messy. The absence of a multilateral security structure, architecture is evident, yet many countries in the region do have long-standing security partnerships and/or alliances. Of course, many of these partnerships are with the United States, but not all. Examples abound: US ROK, US Japan, US Philippines, US Australia, Australia New Zealand. There are, of course, other partnerships: India's, Vietnam's, AUKUS, Quad, the FPDA, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, and Singapore, and other informal ones as well. These arrangements, so to speak, reflect the realities on the ground in the Asia Pacific, a complex and multicultural region. All recognize the need for security, but instead of waiting for everyone to go in at one time in the Asia Pacific, it can start small and then build up from there organically. If not, it stays small, but lots of small ones. The more the merrier, I suppose. Overall, it seems to do the job. On the third point of the prevalence of developmental states is about the reality of the converging interests of trade-dependent developmental states in this region. The dynamism of the Indo-Pacific and the Asia-Pacific did not get realized overnight. It was the relatively long, stable, and peaceful region that allowed for the developmental states to be where they are today: strong economies and prosperous societies. In fact, the write-up in the book that we got alluded to that. And I think the person who wrote it up must have a very, very good political economic seminar in graduate school. Very, very good analogy on the importance of and the relationship of stability and prosperity as an important foundation for where we see the region today. The next group of developmental states have also ambitions to be like the tiger economies of the 1970s and 1980s. These converging interests for wanting a long peace to be the foundation for sustained and resilient economic development has also exerted its influence in contributing to, quote unquote, hold the peace and form a pillar of that regional, quote unquote, regional security system as such. The fourth point and the third point are related. The developmental states in the region are middle powers and small states. All have a stake in the region. To ensure the regional peace and stability, states in the region are starting to step up and act as well. ASEAN is an early one, and it continues to serve as an important platform, not only for its member states, but also for other states with significant interest in the region. Increasingly, the Shangri-La Dialogue, and now the Seoul Defense Dialogue, as part of these multiple platforms for us to be able to meet and talk. There are, of course, other forums as well, but ASEAN, in my view, will continue to play a very important role. Middle powers are all becoming more proactive. Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand as cases in point. In many ways, the absence of that formal multilateral security architecture in our region has not been that detrimental thus far, as the four factors that I have enumerated have helped in creating some sort of a quote-unquote security system in our region. In a way, I concur with a former senior Singaporean diplomat, Bilahari Kausikan, when he suggests that he does not believe that, quote unquote, let me quote here, greater institutionalization of regional forums or the rationalization of the various existing regional forums is necessarily desirable, even if it were possible. This is a messy region, and any new architecture must reflect that reality, close quote. And furthermore, if going forward, if a multilateral security system is to be established in the region, it is important for us to remember what Kausikan calls the paradox of multilateral institutions in the management of great power relation. Simply put, Kausikan proposes that the paradox of multilateral institutions is this: they work best when they do not work too well. Let me end my point here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chen. Next, Dr. Park Jae-jok, please.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Kim. First of all, I'd like to thank organizers for having me here today. I'm very much honored to serve as a panelist this morning. So as U.S. power and commitment has been under decline, relatively decline compared to U.S. power and commitment in the 1990s, when it was very clear that it was a unipolar moment. It has been very controversial whether the liberal international order can be sustainable or can be disrupted. Today, I would like to argue that the former would be the case. The US-led liberal international liberal order would be sustainable. Why? Because of the following reasons. The international order is made up of three pillars: power, institution, and norm. And I would like to claim that US-led security network has been serving as a major institutional figure to sustain US-led liberal international order. As Professor Tan presented a few minutes ago, the US has been maintaining the US-led alliances in the Asia-Pacific. Also, the US has been maintaining security partnerships with various countries in the region, India, Singapore, to name a few. And now the US has been trying to link US-led alliances in the Asia-Pacific to major NATO allies: France, UK, and Germany. Japan and UK have enhanced security cooperation significantly, and UK have been engaging very actively in Indo-Pacific regional security issues. The US-led security network has been also promulgating the norms such as the freedom of navigation and aviation, the rule of law. And also, the US itself may not compete in China militarily, but as a whole, the US-led security network can compete against the increasing Chinese military capabilities. The famous scholar in international relations, John I. Canberry, claimed that if the 21st century geopolitical competition of the 21st century is between China and the United States, China might have an advantage. But if that is the one between China and the West, here I refer West as US-led security network, then the West might triumph, unquote. So that, considering all the three pillars of the power, institution, norm that sustain the liberal international order, now I would claim that the US-led liberal international order would be very sustainable. Then from South Korea's perspective, South Korea needs to enhance South Korea's positional power within the US-led security network. When the current government, the President Yoon Suk-yeol took office 1.5 years ago, there was concern among South Korean elite that South Korea has relegated to the second-tier ally of the United States. Japan, has significantly enhanced security cooperation with Australia and major European powers. On the other hand, back then, because of the different approaches on North Korea, the conservatives in South Korea worry that U.S.-ROK alliance had been weakened. So that the current government tried to enhance South Korea's positional power within the U.S.-led security network by restoring relationship with Japan, and also putting the security cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and United States back on track. So all that said, middle powers in this region, including South Korea, faces a dilemma. They need to enhance their positional power within the U.S.-led security network. At the same time, they should consider China's strategic interest. In particular, South Korea needs to consider China's strategic interest, because we all know that we can't resolve North Korean nuclear issues without Chinese cooperation with South Korea. So that we also need to enhance security cooperation with China. This is the dilemma South Korea faces. This is true to virtually every state in this region. United States, security provider, China, the first trading partner. So that South Korea would like to begin strategic communication with Chinese. So we are trying to resume the stalemated trilateral summit meeting between China, South Korea, and Japan. And we hope the President Xi Jinping would make a visit to South Korea sooner than later. So all that said, South Korea would like to promote bilateral security cooperation among regional powers, sizable regional powers. Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, Singapore, India, to name a few. A unilateral security cooperation, what we refer to spoke unilateral cooperation, can enhance their positional power within the U.S.-led security network. At the same time, if such unilateral security cooperation improves the autonomy, independent from the United States, that can be a foundation for more effective, to build up a more effective multilateral security institution in this region. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Park. I try to summarize based on your common arguments, that I try to find the common arguments among six of you. It's not easy, but basically, most of you emphasize the international rules and norms and rule-based order. Those have been successfully maintained by United States-led leadership. However, we see the hegemonic competition between the United States and China become more and more severe, and this rule-based order was started to being violated. Okay. So some of you suggested that the international institutions weakens, even though some of you also suggest that United States-led existing international orders still are very much sustainable. Some emphasized EU centrality. Most of you emphasize multilateralism instead of each one try to deal with these issues alone. As Dr. Park Jae-jeok suggested, there are neoliberalist arguments, right? Even after hegemony, there are incentives for many countries, including great powers and middle powers, to maintain existing international order, rule-based order. Okay? But we see the reality is that those international institutions loses its role to do so. So how can you make make these international institutions resilient so that it can play the roles that they have to play, they used to play, and they have to play. Okay? That's my question for the second round. Since we are running out of time, I'll give you probably 3 minutes maximum for each of you, okay? And I would like to go in a reverse order. Is it okay, Dr. Park? Please.
So your question is that how can we restore the multilateral organizations back on track, right?
Yeah, institutional efforts. What kind of role or what kind of effort you make to make these existing international institutions more resilient? Yeah.
I would say, I don't know. I think we should put effort to reform. We should put effort to rectify the shortcomings of existing international order. For example, UNSC, UN Security Council. There are 5 veto powers, so that when the things comes up, states can't intervene militarily. One of the 5 permanent members can wield the veto power, then virtually nothing UN can do, military-wise. So that the UN Security Council reform is the first thing that comes to my mind. From South Korea's perspective, we are very much worried about those Korean human rights issues. So since next year, South Korea is going to be the member of UNSC, along with the United States and Japan. And we'd like to use the UN as a platform to raise awareness of North Korean human rights issue. That's one example. But the thing is that if there are still, veto powers within the UN Security Council, it's a bit difficult in South Korea to raise these issues at UN, also in other international organizations. So states should put effort to states should put effort to reform the existing international institutions.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Tan.
Thank you, Professor Kim, for another doctoral comprehensive exam questions that you just asked. It is a very big challenge in reforming multilateral institutions, as much as we want to make it work. And to me, my view is that we have a lot of, and Dr. Park mentioned this, you have veto players all over the place that prevents us from being able to forward whatever we need to do, because you have veto players blocking all these incentives. So the question for me then is that how do we ensure that we can increase the role of the middle powers, right? Because when we talk about the international rules-based system, yes, it was begun by the winning powers after the Second World War, but we have to say that we now have buy-in from all of us into this particular system because we benefited from that system. All the countries, all of us from countries sitting in this panel today, we benefited from that international rules-based order, right? So in my view is that we, short of a full reform because of the veto players, the large veto players in many of these multilateral institutions, we should also allow and understand that the dominant powers, the major powers, do have strategic interests. And as I was mentioning, the effectiveness of many of these multilateral institutions is because there's this paradox of these multilateral institutions. If the major powers do not have buy-in, anything that we do with these multilateral institutions would be not too effective. So in my view, when the big boys are so constrained, then they probably won't buy into make the, do you have to make it so that you allow for some of their strategic interests to be reflected in these multilateral institutions? Having said that, the small states and middle powers do have a major role. So the question is, how do we design institutions that we can make our interests converge even further, right? So converging interests, and that will be, in my view, the way that we can move forward the effectiveness of many of these. So if the middle powers have converging interests, and these converging interests also converge with the strategic interests of these larger players, then we can make these multilateral institutions more effective.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Cha, please.
Yeah, the UN care.
Thank you. When it comes to the reform of the United Nations, we have had many discussions. One of them was to increase the number of standing members of the United Nations Security Council. And Dr. Park also mentioned about the veto rights of the standing members. But what we really think about, once again, is the reasons behind the existence of the United Nations for the past 77 years. The UN has been successful compared to the Union of Nations. And the current existence of the UN has been supported by the veto rights and the standing members of the Security Council. This mechanism has actually helped maintain the UN. So another option that we can try is to strengthen the influence and the power of the United Nations General Assembly. So there are many different ideas that have been proposed by so many people with respect to reforms of the United Nations. But these are not easy because of the relationships among powerful countries within the UN. I would also like to argue that middle power countries, including Korea, need to continue to voice their concerns about the UN. And we need to continue to send a message and make a demand for UN reforms. Otherwise, we cannot make a change. If all these middle power countries continue to voice that concern, then those countries with veto rights will become more careful. Secondly, let's talk about multilateralism and multilateral institutions. In the past, multilateral institutions were used for countries to keep other countries in check. And in order to expand multilateralism, we really have to see what these powerful countries have to do. And I argue that the US and China and these superpowers may need to relegate or reduce their power and allow middle power countries to expand their influence, which will bring about true multilateralism. In addition, some countries have been implementing protectionist policies for trade purposes, and they would impose trade sanctions on other countries. But these powerful countries need to stop doing so that we can realize true multilateralism. Thank you.
Ambassador Ovin, please.
Thank you. And you really ask us a very big question. And previous speakers have been mentioning reforms and also the role of middle powers. So when you asked the question, I was thinking about the dynamic between the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly as one example. And as you know, the Council has been divided on many issues, and in 2021 and 2022, Norway served as elected member on the Council. So we know a bit about the polarization in the Council. But also what has been mentioned also by Mr. Cha, there has been movements. And for example, in February 2022, a draft resolution deploring Russia's aggression failed to be approved due to Russia being able to cast a veto. And this might have helped to speed up the veto initiative in the General Assembly, where all UN member states are represented, and not only representatives from the 15 countries in the Council. And the veto initiative truly came alive 2 months later, when the General Assembly decided that it will call a debate whenever a veto was cast in the UN Security Council. While the General Assembly do not hold the same powers, of course, as the UN Security Council, such a debate forces the members having cast the veto to defend its position in front of all the other member states. And such, it kind of is a mechanism to hold countries accountable. So my point is that while there are limits, what the UN might do, there is still an important normative element involved in having a wealth of UN member states speaking up on issues.
Thank you, Ambassador Robin. Next, Mr. Miller, please.
Thank you for the great question. I agree it's a bit of an exam question, and the rest I'll see if I pass. I guess I would go back to, Professor Kim, your lead into it, which was the incentives, and speaking to that. And Dr. Tan picked that up as well, of, why were these created in the first place? And you think about the World War II and the idea of how can we bring peace and stability in the world because of how disruptive that war was. And incentives are key in this regard, and I think that reflection on the why. When I talked about the Indo-Pacific, we care about the Indo-Pacific for a number of reasons, but not the least of which is the fact that we're a Pacific nation. We have 27,000 kilometers of coastline. As goes the Indo-Pacific, so goes Canada. We are interconnected. The bear analogy that I use was you can put in for any existential threat threatening the world, whether it's climate change or what have you. But if you were thinking about how do we avoid another big war, we need to think about how do we avoid the small wars. U.S. Speaker of the House of Representatives in the 70s and 80s, Tip O'Neill, said all politics is local. Well, I'll apply this to war and invert that. All war is global. And what we've seen with the illegal war of Russia against the Ukraine, we've seen the effects in the world: inflation, supply chain, trade, food insecurity, population displacement. It affects everyone. When I have children, and I say to them often, they always appreciate it, but your irresponsibility, when you're irresponsible, becomes somebody else's responsibility. There's a moral hazard to these decisions, and when an aggressor state thinks, okay, well, it'll be a quick in and out. Russia would have been like, Ukraine will cave quickly, no one will come to their aid in time or even want to commit. Well, they got that completely wrong. It very much always happens in a conflict. You aren't controlling all the variables. And so it hurt everyone. And you think about, the sociologist Emil Durkheim would talk about norms and the fact that deviation, where the exception proves the rule. This is a great opportunity for us all to remind ourselves about why we have these institutions in the first place. Because if a nation in its own self-interest thinks, oh, well, I'm okay living with the risks around this, well, you're not the only one living with those risks. Certainly absolutely impacting those that you're invading, and you're 100% affecting everyone else. Her Excellency made some great points about, how this has in fact strengthened the world in a way that maybe Russia didn't foresee, where you have NATO being emboldened and growing. We have new partnerships, new coalitions that we have formed to help support Ukraine, and capability is scaling up. So I think just that element of just, again, to why do these exist, reminding ourselves about the impacts of different existential threats on all of us, the need to double down on the partnerships and the rules-based order, and the fact that neutrality is a position. Neutrality on these issues is a position. When you don't confront something, you embolden it, and you embolden others to do like things. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, as
Mr.
the last
Schroeder.
speaker, nearly all is already said, and I can support my colleagues, the Norwegian ambassador, my Canadian colleague, the colleague from New Zealand. I really support what's already said there. But look at, especially at the United Nations, I think we must be clear that we have to keep what we have, because there's nothing else on the table. Just giving you a European or transatlantic or example, so we have the OSCE in Europe, cooperative security cooperation, which is going from Vancouver to Vladivostok. So more than 50 nations are therein, but you only can take a decision if all nations agree. And at the moment, it's clear that Russia and Belarus blocks all in this cooperative security cooperation. And therefore, I think it's a must to take a clear position. So we in Germany decided to support Ukraine, for example, as long as it takes. So meanwhile, between the start of the conflict, beginning in February last year, so we invested more than $26 billion in the Ukraine to support the Ukrainians to keep the territorial integrity and sovereignty. And so that's also a clear statement. And I think we have to go along this way. And it's always easy to speak about or over other nations. But first of all, every nation has to ask the question himself, are we doing the right thing at the right time? Is it in the interest of our people? So, and I think that's an approach where we should start in our bilateral talks, just getting clear positions and then just having reflections, are we doing the right thing together?
Okay, thank you. Now, I would like to open floors to questions. If any of you have any question, please raise your hand. Okay, I see no hand raised, so we'll continue our discussion. I think this is going to be our final round of discussion. We only have about 18 minutes, so...
We have an easier question?
Easier question? Yeah. I'll give you an easy one. I'd like to ask each of you to identify what are the most serious challenges that can hamper regional or global cooperation for freedom, peace, prosperity. And I would like you to suggest what your country can do to deal with those challenges. So I would like to be specific about how Norway can do, what Canada can do, what Germany can do, what New Zealand can do, okay? What Korea as a global people state, can do. So if you can be a bit specific, then it'll be great. Thank you. We'll start from Mr. Schroeder. Are you ready? Or should I ask Dr. Park to start
Fine.
first?
I prefer to be the last.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Park, please.
Yeah, I think what is the most serious challenges that can hamper regional cooperation for freedom, peace, and prosperity? But as a Korean, living on the Korean Peninsula, I have to say that that's those Korean nuclear problem. In that sense, we are very much worried about the recent summit talk between Russia and North Korea. We worry that Russia might have tried to transfer space technology to North Korea. We all know that North Korea has bombs. North Korea has been on the verge of completing ICBM capabilities. So if Russia transfer space technology to North Korea will soon complete its ICBM capabilities. Russia might do this under the name of peaceful use of a space. Every sovereign state has a sovereign right of using a space in a peaceful way. So this is what we worry about most worry about at this moment. In order to prevent Russia from transferring space technology to North Korea, what can South Korea do? I don't know. There are virtually practical ways we can stop the transfer if it were indeed taking place. But I think we should send a very strong signal to China that if that being the case, it only strengthens the US-ROK alliance. It only strengthens the trilateral cooperation among South Korea, Japan, and the United States, which China finds very detrimental to its strategic interests. So that China might enhance strategic communication with North Korea in order to discourage Russia and North Korea for space technology transfer. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Chen.
Thank you, Professor Kim. I'll list a little bit of the stuff that I have in mind with this another comprehensive examination question. I think the nature of the challenging issues that we face today is the multidimensionality of the security challenges that we face today, in fact, is also a serious challenge that hampers regional economic growth, regional cooperation. Challenges to comprehensive human security is a collective action problem, right? And oftentimes we know that collective action problem, when you ask everyone to join together, you will always have a problem of free riding. Some people will not do their fair share, and then we start squabbling, So to me, that is one of the issues. So let me just say some of the stuff. So the nature of the challenge itself, like climate change, the non-security traditional threats, and the traditional ones, today do require all of us to do it together. Right? I mean, yesterday on the toast, we were said, the African saying of if you go alone, if you go together, you'll go farther. Right? I totally agree with that. And in my view, this is kind of like a game theoretic problem. It's what we call a stag-rabbit problem. Right? So if all of us hold the line and do our fair share, then we will be able to hunt the stag. Right? But if each of us, kind of like defect, you can have the rabbit and all of us have nothing. Right? So my view then is that I guess, what can we do? What can New Zealand do? And we are a small state. Our concentration and our deep interest is in South Pacific. It's in the South Pacific that we want South Pacific to be free, to be prosperous, to be economically resilient, because we have neighbors who are challenged literally by climate change, right? And this is a collective action problem for them. So what do I mean by this? A stag-rabbit problem for all of us. It means to say that, from the wise word of the pop king Michael Jackson, it's the man in the mirror. It's the man in the mirror. What do I mean by that? We have to take ownership. We, New Zealand in the South Pacific, we should start doing our fair share in our region first. Right? Not about burden sharing, but the reality is we burden shift. Right? If we take care of our own neighborhood well, then it frees resources for other people to do other things. But we cannot pass the buck to the next generation again. I know we say this, and there's a very wise saying by our indigenous people, the Maori people. They say that we don't leave something for our children. It's not that. We borrow the future from our children, right? If we think of it that way, then the reality is we, as middle powers, as small states, who have stake in the stability of the world, have to take ownership. Don't wait for the other guy to do it. We do it first, the man in the mirror. That's where I am.
Thank you, Dr. Ten. I give you A+ for the comprehensive exam answer. Dr. Cha Deon?
예, 저는 더 근본.
For me, I'd like to raise a more fundamental question, which is about crisis of democracy. You may think that democracy has nothing to do with international order, but democracy is very critical. Democracy begins with the recognition of diversity. Today, other than a few regimes, every other country is arguing that they're a democracy. But there aren't many countries where a true value of democracy is upheld. Democracy has also to do with the rising nationalism. There is a tendency for some countries and some nations to believe that they are superior than others, and cooperating with similar nations will realize their interests. But that is not the right way to go, and that's what's happening in Ukraine and a conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So we need to overcome this very closed nature of nationalism and revive cosmopolitanism and democracy based on diversity. And to do so, we need to nurture our awareness and understanding of the importance of diversity at the global level. And secondly, I would like to talk about the crisis of non-proliferation regime. The non-proliferation regime has been concerned with massive weapons of massive destructions, including bio and chemical weapons. But when you take a look at conflicts all over the world, you can see how many different weapons have been used. President Yoon addressed at the UN General Assembly, and there was also a speech by Mr. Yoon. And he's been arguing that nuclear issues of North Korea are not just a problem on the Korean Peninsula, but this may not be perceived this way by other countries because other countries believe that North Korea will not attack them with such weapons. But when we approach this from a perspective of proliferation, then they will become more concerned. There was a recent strike by Hamas on Israel, and there was anti-tank missile launches and underground tunnels where weapons were stored. And you know that their weapon systems are quite similar to North Korean weapon systems. This means that conventional weapons have been widespread and prevalent in some of these conflict-ridden regions. And this has very much to do with proliferation. And so I like to argue that the international community has to be more concerned about proliferation aspects of North Korean nuclear and missile programs. So the international community has to work together in implementing the UN sanctions, and they need to work together to make sure that North Korea gives up nuclear and we prevent proliferation. Thank you.
Next, Ambassador Ovin.
Thank you. To answer your question about what is the most serious challenge, I'd like to go back to my original introduction where I pinpointed values. And I'm very grateful to Professor Cha, who also mentioned the recognition of diversity, because what we see with authoritarian regimes and practices are that very often the most vulnerable, women and minorities, are the first to lose their rights. To lose their rights, reproductive rights, and also diversity, especially for LGBT communities. That is very often coming under attack in these rising authoritarian regimes. And standing up for such rights might not be defense policy in the traditional way, and it might not be a theme for dialogue on the Seoul Defense Dialogue, but it illustrates a very good point, I think, and it speaks to how security is becoming more and more interconnected. And now an example where I also answer what can Norway do. For instance, security policy, energy policy, and trade policy are becoming more intertwined. And Norway is now the largest gas supplier to Europe, and we have offshore installations in the North Sea and 8,800 kilometers of pipelines. Stable and predictable supply of energy is more important than ever, and security to this infrastructure is critical. And Norway is taking that responsibility very seriously, and together with NATO allies, monitoring, of course, and strengthening our efforts to protect oil and gas pipelines. So just one example of how things are interconnected and how we take responsibilities in our regions. But in the years to come, our economies will be running on renewable energy, and that will also lead to competition over new value chains, technologies, and new materials. So we will see that we will have to cooperate with countries all over the world to actually reach the climate goals and also be successful in the green transition. And that again makes us think about where are our resilience in terms of infrastructure, in terms of any potential breakdown of supply chain, and also where are our sensitive technologies, and how do we actually avoid that these considerations being used as arguments for protectionism. And that is not in anyone's interest, and not in the interest of Norway. We are therefore very heavily promoting free trade and also international collaboration. And I think that dealing with these new challenges and interconnectivities, we need to be led by the same compass, the one that we have been talking about, the values, humanity, international law, and human rights. And we have to work together to find that balance, meeting these challenges. So we need to work more together, not less, to meet these future challenges. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Miller, please.
Did you say Dr. Miller? I appreciate the... I didn't know we were doing honorary doctorates here.
So you are taking a comprehensive exam. So
yeah, that's right. So glad to be on this panel, and so glad that my German colleague and I are going last and benefiting from all the great comments. I think a couple reflections. One would be the concurrent threats that we're all dealing with at the same time, and we've talked about the number of them. Am I causing feedback? I hear a thing in the background. I'm not sure if that's me, but I'll leave it to others. We have finite resources. We're going to have more things thrown at us. And so the degree that we can deconflict on ways that we want to contribute to a collective exercise, and knowing where we can pull back because others can move forward, not in a way that we're abdicating a role, but in a way through conversation we recognize that there are certain strengths and capabilities elsewhere that make things make best sense. And we're thinking about that a lot from a Canadian perspective with the Indo-Pacific strategy. If we're not going with our ideas of how we should spend our money, we actually want to have conversations with other partners in the region to figure out where Canada can best support an effort. And I think that is key. In terms of when we do go, and we do go together to deal with a challenge, that element of concerted action where we've exercised and we've practiced how we might do things, we've worked through different scenarios and planning, that builds up a sense of how we understand we will support each other and are reliable as partners, and also avoid unintended consequences. And this is where I'm going to beat my analogy one last time fully into the ground. But in the bear analogy with a group of people, you don't want somebody there that's going to throw a rock at it. That escalates it and throws it all into a different space. So we need to practice. There might be some things that that Canada might need to be aware of, that a certain kind of thing that we do might not be well received and might not be useful, and so conversation is key. Diversity, so glad that that point was made. Canada, as you may be aware, really prides itself on our multicultural society, and we do a lot of efforts internally to make sure that we have a representative government that represents women, people of color, LGBTQ2+, different religions, and the rest. We want to reflect that Canadian society. And a part of that is social justice, but also a part of it is very much a business decision, that even if you, for some reason you didn't agree with the social justice element of it, which you would agree with the business case for it, which is we are dealing with complex problems, which means we need a variety of perspectives looking at that problem. There are certain things that I, as a privileged white male, questions that I wouldn't even think to ask. I might not look at it the same way. So there are these multiple facets, and we all need to be around the table looking at those different facets, asking the right questions, putting forward novel solutions. And in an international context, similarly, we will all have a diversity of perspectives, lived experiences that will help us to figure out what are the best collective strategies that we can utilize to deal with the challenges of the future. And maybe I'll end it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Finally, but not least.
Thank you very much. So maybe I want to show it as a triangle. So at the one hand, we already said we had a crisis of democracies and values. We have a rise of nationalism. And when we're looking at the populations in different areas in the world, we have the wish for easy solutions. And this combined with disinformation, mistrust, hybrid action is a very dangerous area and surrounding. So, and at the end, what can we do? As like-minded countries, we must be ready to deter and defend our values. And this is on the diplomatic side, and this may be also on the military side if it's necessary. And we must be ready, and we have to be ready to defend our values together. And so it's worth knowing for what we have to fight when it's necessary.
Okay, thank you. We had 90-minute long, excellent and very helpful discussions to promote our understanding of new security challenges and ways to resolve those challenges. Especially, I would like to emphasize that the international institutions are important in promoting regional and global cooperations. And there are more rooms for like-minded middle powers to play the effective roles to make those international institutions more resilient. With this note, I would like to close this session. I really appreciate all the panelists' helpful and excellent and frank comments and your participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the panel discussants for the passionate deliberations. Please give them another big round of applause. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the hopeful messages and the final messages for the raise of a regional and global cooperation. That now rounds down our final plenary session for the Seoul Defense Dialogue 2023. Thank you for your participation and thank you for your comments. Now, after a short break, we will have our closing ceremony, ladies and gentlemen. So please do make use of the break, and we will have the closing ceremony to mark the end of the grand finale at 11 a.m. sharp. So we will see you back here at 11 a.m. Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, may I have your attention, please? The closing ceremony of the Seoul Defense Dialogue 2023 will begin in just a few minutes. For our guests who are still in the lobby, we kindly would like to ask you to now start moving inside the grand ballroom. Once again, may I have your attention, please? The closing ceremony of the Seoul Defense Dialogue 2023 will begin in just a few minutes. We ask that you now start proceeding your way into the grand ballroom to make your way inside and to take your seats. Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, another gentle reminder, please, for those of you who are still in the lobby area. We will be beginning our closing ceremony for the Seoul Defense Dialogue 2023 in just a few minutes. We kindly ask all of our guests to please start to make your way into the grand ballroom. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending our closing ceremony for the Seoul Defense Dialogue 2023. Thank you very much for being here with us over the past 2 days, and I hope that it was fruitful for all of you. We discussed a number of different topics, starting from the escalation of the North Korean nuclear threat and international communication response towards a free, peaceful, and prosperous Indo-Pacific, all the way to ways for regional and global cooperation. And alongside that, we also had 4 special sessions yesterday. And without your support, we couldn't have had it all happen together. Thank you very much. We've had a lot of meetings and conferences, and many different opinions were posed. And I believe that it is now time for us to look back at all of the precious moments of the Seoul Defense Dialogue 2023 all together through some different photos. So I'd like to turn your attention to the screen for a recap. I hope you enjoyed the few snapshots of the past 3 days, and albeit short, it was 3 days. I hope that you enjoyed the passionate deliberations and all of the discussions that we had. Well, thank you once again for your hard work and your passionate deliberations. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Shin Bum-chul, the Vice Minister of National Defense of the Republic of Korea, for his closing remarks. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Let me speak in. Please use your simultaneous interpretation tool. Yeah.
Distinguished guests from home and abroad, sadly, we are close to the end of the 2023 Seoul Defense Dialogue. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the representatives of each country and international organization, as well as civilian security experts, for your participation, as your participation has enabled us to successfully host the 2023 Seoul Defense Dialogue. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to share your wisdom with us concerning various security issues around the world. Distinguished guests from home and abroad, this year at the Seoul Defense Dialogue, we have discussed cooperation and solidarity as a solution to overcome security issues that are challenging the Korean Peninsula and the Indo-Pacific. During the first plenary session, where I participated as a member of the panel, we discussed the escalated North Korea nuclear threat and international community responses. We discussed how the advancement of nuclear capabilities of North Korea is threatening the international security order in Northeast Asia and around the world, and therefore many policy tasks were presented in order to denuclearize North Korea and to suppress the threat of nuclear and missiles by North Korea. I look forward to stronger international solidarity for the complete denuclearization of North Korea. With the increased strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific, there are many challenges that are rising in this area, and therefore during plenary session 2, we dealt with the area of Indo-Pacific. The Republic of Korea announced our Indo-Pacific strategy last December, and we have pledged to contribute to creating a free, peaceful, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. Through this year's dialogue, we were able to once again reconfirm that international society's multilateral cooperation and solidarity will indeed make sure that our vision for a free, peaceful, and prosperous Indo-Pacific will come true. We also had opportunities to discuss new emerging issues such as marine security, cybersecurity, and space security, as well as the military use of AI and the changes in defense industry structures. Celebrating the 70th anniversary of the ceasefire agreement, we were also able to find implications of the ceasefire agreement for international security cooperation. Distinguished guests from home and abroad, during the third plenary session this morning, we have once again emphasized that with the changing security environment, the challenges that we are faced with cannot be resolved with just the efforts of a single nation or the existing international society regimes. During the last 3 days, we have been able to reaffirm our determination for cooperation and solidarity to overcome the common challenges of the international society. The Republic of Korea, as a responsible member of the international society, will continue to strengthen our solidarity with like-minded countries and actively participating in creating a free, peaceful, and prosperous international society. Seoul Defense Dialogue will continue to serve its role as a platform for dialogue for the cooperation and solidarity of the international society. We look forward to your continuous interest and support of all of you here today. Once again, thank you very much for your participation despite your busy schedules. And this now brings us to the end of the 2023 Seoul Defense Dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your kind words and your closing remarks. Thank you very much. And as you may have heard, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the 12th Seoul Defense Dialogue 2023. Well, thank you very much for all of your participation. And to quote the words of our keynote speaker from our opening ceremony yesterday, the Honorable Mr. Pan Ki-moon, it is truly the time for all hands on deck. And I believe that it was all of our honorable participants who showed us through your participation. And without your participation, I believe that our Seoul Defense Dialogue 2023 could not have been such a resounding success. So thank you once again from the organizers for your avid participation and your contributions. Well, I hope you all have a fruitful time while you stay here in Seoul, and may you have a lovely journey back to your homes. Well, thank you once again, and I hope to see you again next year. Thank you very much. 고맙습니다.